We can hear you. Good morning.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I can hear
Hi,
you.
great. Morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Um, I'd like to
Pleasure is
very
mine.
much,
Thank you for inviting me.
I'd very much like to thank you all for attending this meeting today. This is our second technical meeting for our um, project CLASP, Climate Philanthropy and Strategic Partnerships. And this is very specific to our philanthropy for climate movement and our funder, Caribbean funder commitment that we're going to be creating. So very quickly, my name is Talia Mohammed. I'm one of the project directors at the Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance, and we are very much going to try and stick to this agenda today, and um, have a good discussion with you guys who are attending on some of the things that we've been sharing with you all. So the objectives of the meeting today are basically to continue to build your understanding of the philanthropy's role in climate action and build upon the recommendations that we made and we got sequestered from last meeting. And the very important 7 pillars that are part of the framework for the Caribbean or the funders commitment that we're going to be developing, and the recommendations and feedbacks on the components that we also shared in order to integrate into the drafting of our first Caribbean philanthropy for climate commitment. And we also going to be hoping to create a committee to do early drafting for the funders commitment. And of course, we have our climate journey survey. So thank you all very much for attending. Very quickly, let me just review the agenda as well. Anthea McLaughlin, our CEO from Carifil Alliance, our powerhouse. She's going to be going through the overview of the Caribbean Funder Commitment process, um, recap of our last meeting and recommendations as mentioned, the 7 pillars, uh, the components. Dwayne is going to come in as well, our project manager, and he is going to share some preliminary results from our feedback survey, which is one that we shared, a general survey, and those from our youth. Jamila is here on the meeting as well. We should be able to hear from her. 10:40 or so, we want to have a feedback discussion. And then, of course, a first draft of the funder climate commitment will be shared. And going to ask people to see if they could support the formation of the committee, and then we'll go through our next steps and timeline. So I'm going to hand it over right now to Anthea, and she's going to take you through the majority of the presentation today, and Dwayne and Jamila will come in when she introduces them. So over to you, Anthea.
Thank you. I'll just put on my video. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. It's good to see all of you. I see familiar names, so I feel that I'm in wonderful company and those that we can have a engaging conversation with today. So Talia shared with you that we convened on June 10th a few weeks ago. Time is going fast, where we brought together Caribbean funders, civil society leaders, and our global partners. One who is here today, Erica Miller, is also here with us from Wings, where we spoke about the climate commitment, and we spent some time reflecting and co-creating the first draft of our funders commitment. There, our goals were very clear. As Talia shared, we spoke about how to, what is climate philanthropy, and to understand what does global climate philanthropy movement mean. We can talk about that a little bit more as well. We also shared and explored how to adapt to global frameworks within the context of Caribbean realities, that any funder commitment or climate philanthropy commitment that we are drafting has to be grounded in what we are experiencing within the Caribbean. I'm just adding and I'm admitting as I speak and also to begin to build a Caribbean climate funder commitment, one that is again rooted in the urgency that we all know is right upon us, and also the leadership that is here in the Caribbean. In terms of key points that were made at our philanthropy forum, our technical assistance workshop, we were grounded with our stark realities in terms of why this funder commitment matters to us. And it's clear that if we're going to talk about the Caribbean region, we have to ground it in facts. And so we all know, it's not new to any one of us here, that the Caribbean is among the most climate vulnerable regions in the world. And yet we continue to receive less than 2% of our global climate finance. And we also know that our systems, whether it's from emergency response to long-term investment, we all know that we are stretched thin throughout the Caribbean. And we know that many of our institutional funding models continue to not align or are misaligned with our region, most pressing needs. And when we talk about the work of philanthropy, but when we talk about the work of climate in the space, we are focusing on adaptation, we're focusing on loss and damage, food security, and displacement. And we have to ensure that our funding models reflect that. We had our guest speaker, Oral Fraser, who was with us last time from Open Society Foundations. And I wanted to just repeat it here that he made a very powerful call to action. And he reminded us all, and I think we all agreed by the end of the meeting, that any climate-led philanthropy must have a couple of things. And one in particular, that it must be culturally grounded. We'll talk about what that means today. We have to be politically aware of in terms of what is happening around us, like by the external, global, as well as local and regional, and that our climate philanthropy must be unapologetic in terms of being committed to a community-based leadership. And so many of you that have been invited here this morning reflects the representation that we need. Some of you are here who are community-based leaders. Some of you are foundations, some of you are advocates, and it's important that all our voices are heard and are reflected within our philanthropy forum, our philanthropy commitment. We were all challenging ourselves, and we said that, what's very important that when we talk about our philanthropy commitment, that it reflects who we are intrinsically, and it supports how we lead within the Caribbean. And exactly what the group came together with, we all said that centering on equity is going to be important, agency is going to be important, and the regional voices are going to be important, and that there can be no add-ons in that context. Equity is not an add-on, agency is not an add-on, and regional voice is not add-on. This is the foundation for our climate philanthropy commitment within the Caribbean. So our next step today will be to talk about this Caribbean climate philanthropy commitment, and then talk about some of the pillars that we are going to adapt to make sure that it reflects our lived experience. In terms of quick facts, you see on the screen real quickly, we shared that I see some of you weren't here last time, and we thought that we would have some new faces. So we just want to repeat quickly, but you, of course, can look at the recordings, that we shared quick facts with you that CLASP, which stands for Climate Philanthropy and Strategic Partnerships, is a platform that brings together funders in the Caribbean. So whether you're big or you're small, if you're local or international, we are uniting around the climate action. And so we consider this effort that we're putting together a transformative effort for CARIFIL Alliance, but particularly for the Caribbean. And it's important that when we talk about the work that we're driving innovative solutions, when we talk about our commitment more specifically. In terms of Philanthropy for Climate, it began in 2019. UK-based funders made a public commitment. The movement grew, and now there's over 800 funders in over 22 countries that have joined on this join on to this Philanthropy for Climate movement. Wings that has been spearheading it with their international partners. They created a 7-pillar framework to help funders include climate in everything that they do. So no matter what your mission is, you have a space within this particular philanthropy commitment. And it's important to note that we consider this a significant opportunity for the region to connect to global climate efforts. In terms of the 7 pillars, I can say that the 7 pillars have been well thought through. Many of the global partners across the world have used the 7 pillars. What we are going to talk about today is that we're going to be nuancing the 7 pillars so it matches how we experience it in the Caribbean. But real quickly, the 7 pillars are here on just for us quickly just to share. There's 7 of them: education and learning. Again, this is more to talk about understanding of climate change within the organization. What does that mean for us? They come from a global framework, and later today we will talk about the language for that, what that means. So the education and learning pillar is talking about building awareness and climate change. The commitment of resources, what that means is, investing in real money and resources in climate solutions, and especially how, that helps us to adapt and protect vulnerable communities. So we'll talk about that. It identifies integration, which really means, and we talk that language all the time. I'm speaking to the choir here. Integration means that climate shouldn't be separate, and that it should be built into everything that we do, into our programs, into our strategies, into our decision making. And so we'll be very specific in terms of what other areas we want to talk about when we talk about integration. The transparency pillar, again, we must be open about our climate journey. One of the opportunities that we have with this commitment is that we can begin to share our progress together, talk about some of our challenges, talk about some of our setbacks, talk about some of our lessons along the way. And so transparency can now be a way in which we can communicate among each other, but also address the issues at hand. And so this gives us a really wonderful opportunity to do that. I guess in terms of operations, again, the pillar here is about walking the talk. It's about how, within our respective organizations, how are we reducing waste? How are we using energy? How are we emitting? What is our emission use through our day-to-day practices? And if we have lessons to share, this is an opportunity to do that. I guess in terms of influencing and advocacy, here we are talking about how we can use our voice and platform to encourage others, including our partners, our government, our public, to act on climate. And so this is another opportunity for us to talk specifically about what our specific advocacy should look like. And again, as I said, in terms of transparency, again, it's about reminding us that sharing is important and holding ourselves accountable. So at our meeting on June 10th, we also talked about the importance of intermediaries. Many of you that are here today are within that space who are operating as intermediaries. And we consider that very part of I think the makeup of the Caribbean, that many of us are within that space where we serve as that bridge between funders and frontline communities. And so when we talk about this philanthropic commitment, we have to make sure that we give space to our intermediary functions within the Caribbean. And also how we develop this funder commitment, we must find ways to include critical stakeholders, our climate and environmental actors in the space, our enabling partners, our field builders. Today we have our youth here, which are very important to the field building work. Their perspective is different because they're talking about now, but they're also very much passionate about the future. We need to hear their voice. And we also need to hear the voice of our grassroots leaders and our community voices to inform our commitment. And so as we develop our commitment over the next few months, that it's ensure that we have those perspectives represented. want to go to the next slide real quickly because I really want to get to our discussion, and that drafting this Caribbean philanthropy commitment is going to happen within four steps. So we've gathered some recommendations that you've made. The report is there. I'll go through it in a little while in terms of what you shared with us. And then today we'll talk about what we need to add. And then we are circulating a survey as we speak. We've gathered information so far from some young people and some from funders as well, and some NGOs around their perspectives around the recommendations and components. And we will share those survey results over the next few weeks. And of course, we'll begin to draft our survey as well, create the first draft of our Caribbean climate survey. So in terms of recommendations, I just want to speak to some of them now. You see them on the screen. So in terms of, you can just go to the recommendation slide, Talia. So in terms of our thematic priority areas, they are there on the screen that you can see, and the thematic priority areas focused on four. Can't read them here that well. Please excuse me, can't see too well, but it focused on systems change. It focused on the participatory aspect of our commitment is also very important. The role of intermediaries, global, local bridging, they consider important. And of course, urgency is something that takes precedence over everything in terms of talking about our work. So we'll look at that. In terms of the key recommendations, there were 8 of them, and just want to review them quickly with you. And that the 8 recommendations that were made at our meeting focused on the global framework that was presented to us at our meeting. And what we agreed on, which is what we want to do today, is to adapt the global framework to the Caribbean. And that the 7 pillars that were shared are very helpful. But we recognize that they were generic in nature and that they need to reflect the Caribbean culture, the challenges and strengths, and that we had to add and go beyond the adaptation mitigation focus on climate justice, social economic realities, and migration and local governance. So when we draft our commitment, these are the issues that need to be addressed and reflected within our commitment. The other recommendation quickly was ecosystem voices need to be present to make space for all key players, diaspora funders, youth leaders, grassroots invaders, intermediary groups that connect funders with communities, researchers to provide local data and evidence. And then the third recommendation focused on strengthening advocacy and community trust, and that we don't just talk, but we have to act. And so elevating local voices and stories, focusing on narrative building is a commitment that we want our foundations and our funders to commit to. We want them to say upfront that they're committing to transparency that goes beyond reporting, to include community buy-in, building community trust and building public accountability, and also including local knowledge holders to strengthen our advocacy. And recommendation 4 had to do with addressing unique climate risks, how to tackle issues that are specific to our region. So very specifically, climate-related migration and displacement, food security, economic instability, urban and rural displacement. And of course, most importantly, that many of our diaspora community is very concerned about is how we plan ahead and that we don't wait for a crisis to react. And so that what that really means in terms of the funder commitment is that we want our fund in our commitment, we want our funders to say that they're going to give resources ahead of time instead of at just the time of crisis. And of course, recommendation 5 focused on including more stakeholders in the process, which really means that we need bigger tables, as discussed earlier. We need to make sure that our aid table is inclusive of universities, of the media, diaspora, regional agencies such as CARICOM, and that we connect to institutions that we know are important within the context of climate, and that is our IOM, even our World Food Program to address food security issues, to reflect the priorities across the region. And of course, recommendation 6 had to do with supporting intermediaries. Here again, that we know that in the Caribbean, intermediaries are our bridge builders, and they help to channel resources to our front line. And also at the same time, they help us to train and build capacity with our civil society and share lessons. And of course, our PSO function, which is our philanthropy serving organization, which is where we operate, and that is our space within the Caribbean that we're here to not only to support civil society, of course, and to be the conduit, but also to make sure that we have built infrastructure within the region for funders to convene. And of course, the last 2 recommendations focus on tackling gaps and unlocking opportunities. So, it's dealing with the challenges that we know matter significantly, and that the framework that we're going to create must be, must focus on local voices, and that the challenges are real. So some of the challenges that you mentioned is that the framework feels too global, local voices are missing, technical language barriers, not enough storytelling, but then the opportunities are clear, and that make the pillars the Caribbean focus, and that we can also ensure that we boost local action. And then I'll say key recommendation 8 has to do with the thought that we need to build trust by reporting not just to funders, but to communities. And so it'll be interesting when we draft our commitment that we use language to make sure that's explicit there, that funders are going to be operating differently within the space, and they're going to be committing to say, listen, we're not just going to ask communities to report to us, but we are going to report to communities. And that will be a nice add-on in our commitment to write, and also to involve people in the tracking and shaping of the work. So all in all the recommendations made clear that that the Caribbean climate commitment must have a few things. And I just want to go to that slide real quickly. And it really, it has 7, and I'm just going to read them quickly. And that is that we've got to recognize the climate emergency. Funding flows must reflect urgency and equity. Necessary changes need to bring back challenges and opportunities. One big issue as well had to do with the issue around intersectionality, a term probably not that it's overused here, but it's a reality for us in the Caribbean. That is not just an environmental issue, it's a health and education, gender, economic, youth, cultural issue that affects all sectors of society. One of the things we want to make explicit in our commitment that we must use language that says that philanthropy must be bold and inclusive. So regardless of the mission and the size and the structure, there's a role for all funders to play and intermediaries to play in supporting climate action and ensuring that no community is left behind. This is a tall order, but these are the kinds of components that we need to ensure that our commitment reflects, and also that there's a special responsibility for funders. One of the things that we want to make clear within the commitment is that the commitment states specifically that the resources are held for public good, and that there's an opportunity, an obligation to act in service of climate justice and resilience. And of course, the very key component has to do with that the moment to act is now, and that as we act, our actions lead to solutions. And so I've said a lot here, and I think we can expound on that today. As such, we also want to look at the principles and actions here, and that our principles and actions should be very specific to learning and building, climate responsive resources, integration investments, lead by example, and being accountable. So these are the recommendations and the components that were presented on June 10th that we sort of encapsulated here and in our report for discussion today. And I'm just going to ask Dwayne to talk about the survey very quickly. And here the survey focuses on the perspectives on the components that I just shared and what some of the feedback has been. And then we're going to get to discussion. So go ahead, Dwayne. So go ahead. You want to talk about that? Go ahead. Any comments so far? Because I'm not seeing Dwayne on. Hello? Hello?
So far, nothing.
Okay.
Okay, I'll do it.
Okay.
Twin,
Yeah,
remember
put,
he
yeah,
said he was having internet issues to say.
okay,
Okay,
so just
I'm
put it
just
up
going
on
to
the,
share the slideshow.
yeah, just put it up on the slideshow and then we can talk about it.
All right, so everyone hearing me? You know, when you're controlling the presentation, you can't see a Zoom. Everyone hearing me?
Yes.
Good, good. Okay, so we did a survey, as Anthea mentioned, and it was very important. And the survey is still ongoing, and we welcome everyone to share with your colleagues and friends as well, to who all stakeholders matter at this point to get this feedback. So the most urgent is climate issue facing the community. As you note here, most people mentioned flooding. And it's been a growing point of urgency across most regions in the Caribbean as we battle with this ever-changing weather phenomenon of rain and our dry season getting shorter. So flooding is a major point of concern. We see global warming, and of course, people mentioned coral bleaching and the heat itself too on the other flip side of the rain. Um, do you feel that funders are paying enough attention to local voices and climate action? And, general consensus is no. And some people are not even sure if people are paying attention or not in terms of the funders themselves. What barriers have you faced when trying to access climate funding or support? This is a question that all nonprofits we ask, and we try to get this feedback in at most every scenario that we have. We get NGOs together to get this question going. So the main issue here, they don't know where to apply. The funder priorities and eligibility criteria are not aligned with actual climate finance. This has been my challenge as well too over the years, with funders having this criteria and it not really aligned to the needs on the ground. Limited availability of funds and no loans available for proof of concepts and feasibilities, which is something that in Trinidad and Tobago we've been seeing some sort of movement in the private sector to try have these grants and competitions, but still, it's still not enough for startups and entrepreneurship to spur innovation. And organizations to apply for funding are unknown. So a general consensus of not having if they don't know where to go for information, and then the type of funding available not relevant to what they need. What skills and tools or support would help you be more effective as a climate leader or advocate? Funding. Nobody even studying mentorship. Everybody just wants access to this money because I guess we're at a stage in the Caribbean where we all understand that there are a lot of much more technical people moving around in the nonprofit space, and people just need access to funding to get these projects off the ground. And of course, building capacity, training, and workshops are something people always want to have access to improve how they apply for grants and their granting skills most times. What do you think funders should do differently to include youth and community in climate solutions? So allow intermediaries to channel climate finance to youth and community climate projects specifically, and shift towards longer term programmatic support. We hear this all the time, these short term projects, and you can't really build in sustainability into the project because the funding runs out before you could do that. Youth programs support climate philanthropy, which is what we're here to help support. Integrate into the needs of youth and community instead of using them. Explore the potential with AI and technology to provide more RFQ and proposals for more youths and women with solutions and joint ventures to enhance Caribbean sustainability. So that'll be improved collaboration, access to finance by youth and women, education, engagement, and climate knowledge. So from this, we basically see that people want better access to finance, they want more training, and they want to know where the funding is so they could meet the needs specifically to the challenges on the ground. And, a lot of the challenges on the ground, you need a collaboratory approach to fixing it. So it really is about, how we could um, use this data and plug it into what we're trying to create in the funders commitment. Is Jamila here, or I could just go through the youth?
Just go through the youth quickly so we can
Okay.
get to
So
discussion.
the most urgent climate financing issue, flooding, and of course, as I mentioned, extreme temperatures in the different seasons, dry season, extreme heat, and flooding, of course, rainy season, extreme rain. Do you feel that funders are paying enough attention? No, 100% of them said no. Do you feel funders are paying enough attention to local voices? In climate action, 50% said yes in innovation and technology, and 50% in disaster preparedness and response. They feel that there's nobody is paying attention to climate education awareness, green skills and jobs, and arts and storytelling, which is an important part of advocacy. What barriers do youth face when trying to access climate funding or support? Some individuals don't value climate knowledge and awareness about climate crisis as important other issues, and financial management and leadership is a major barrier. What do you think funders should do differently to include youth and community in climate solutions? So this is basic feedback that we got. Endorse and acknowledge youth change, which we think is also something that we've been promoting in our youth hub. The change makers, and get them to prioritize the projects that are more effective, and move away, of course, from the one-time, one-off project grants, have more multi-year grants, and that would help with sustainability and organizational development. If you could tell your funders one thing, what they should do to support your climate leadership, what would it be? Fund you directly and trust them with power, not just panels, pilots, and prizes, and involve youth with financial and material support instead of only participatory. What skills or tools or support would help you be more effective as a climate leader or advocate? Mentorship is mentioned here, and I'm in strong favor for mentorship. So everybody wants training from the youth point of view, and they want more mentorship, and they want direct funding. So I'll hand it back over to Anthea here, where she's going to talk about our 7 pillars and how we've been having a discussion about adopting it for drafting the new commitment.
Mhm. Do we want to stop here and have a conversation, or you want me to just go through the 7 pillars first?
I think we should go through this part first,
Okay.
and then we could have a discussion on why we made some changes.
Okay. Sure. So in terms of the global 7-pillar framework, it has been thoughtfully adapted to reflect, I would say, values and leadership. in the global space. And so what you see here is that the pillars that I shared originally, education and learning all the way through transparency, are the global frameworks. And as we shared with you in the recommendations and the components, there was strong recommendation that we adapt these pillars to reflect Caribbean realities. And so what we have done, based on hearing from you and reviewing all the recommendations, we have come up with the titles that we could use for our adaptation. And again, this is something that we would take to the committee for us to edit and review and nuance if required. So there are many different ways in which we could do this, but we decided that we would share with you what we think could be an option for us. And so because the recommendations talked about knowledge and narrative building, the opportunity for us would be to add knowledge and education, to keep education, but add knowledge to our particular pillar. Because we are focusing on advancing climate literacy within the Caribbean by centering our Caribbean narratives. We know that intergenerational learning is something that's important. We also know that local knowledge is important. Community storytelling is important. And so the knowledge in our particular pillar might be something that we should include. And I know that we've spoken very significantly about regional wisdom and empowerment as a very important context as well, and building capacity. So this is an option that the committee will take and look at and decide if we want to add empowerment to our particular pillar. And also it also addresses the issues of building capacity and creating funding for developing tools and research platforms. For number 2, we added commit resources boldly and equitably. I think you've heard that in the recommendations that I shared earlier, that we have to be bold in terms of how we design and talk about our commitment to resources in the Caribbean. And maybe that we need to add the word bold in our commitment and the word equitable, because we all know that many of the resources across the Caribbean is not equitably distributed. And so we thought that that particular word should be added to our framework. And it also deals with the issues of timely, flexible concepts that we know that our funding needs to be. And I know, again, we're speaking to the choir here, but we do know that having multi-year funding, unrestricted funding, is something that we all want in the Caribbean. And so maybe in our commitment, we can add that very specifically, that the issue of equity is important. And if we feel that we need to add other words, we can. It's all up to us. But again, in this particular area, we are able to we can create a paragraph that focuses on what equity means. And I know equity also means pooled funding and coming up with re-granting mechanisms, etc., that we can put in our paragraphs. The other one has to do with integration and collaboration. So we thought that integration was fitting for us, but we needed to add the word collaboration for the Caribbean. And if we feel we need to add partnerships, we can. That's to be debated within the committee, how we want to do that. But we know that we want to commit to integrating climate resilience across all sectors, and that building cross-cutting partnerships is also something that we need to do to address our particular issues, particularly around displacement and food insecurity. We can't do that without collaboration and partnerships. So we want to make that clear within our commitment. And then, of course, endowments, assets, and investment, we thought was, I think that was appropriate, but for us to debate it more specifically, we added the word investment because we thought that investment is a little bit broader and that is a little bit more open to include other industries and economies that we are experiencing within the Caribbean in terms of green industries and community-based enterprises across the Caribbean. So we thought that investment would be a key word to add, but we can talk more specifically if we think that if it should be included here. In terms of operations, it was wide open for the global framework pillar, but for us, we thought we would add best practices as another component for our pillar. Again, for us to discuss whether we include it or not, but best practices, I do think, particularly in the Caribbean, we want our funders to give resources to best practices that work, that are working and evidence-based, and make a commitment to say that if it's working, that they are willing to scale and replicate it. And so we have an opportunity within our funder commitment to speak truth to the best practices that is actually happening within the Caribbean now, and being willing to say that they will continue to support it, particularly our sustainable, inclusive governance practices that we know are working within the space. In terms of advocacy and policy, we wanted to add here the word systems change. Many in terms of Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance, we are not just talking about funding in the Caribbean and making it equitable, but we want to make sure that there's systems in place that moves us into a space where we could say that real change is happening and that there are systems that would propel those changes over time. And so the systems change addition for us, I think, is important. And I think in our commitment, we can write a few sentences to speak to funders committing to giving money for systems change work and also giving money for policy change work. And so we leverage our platforms to amplify Caribbean voices, we support policy change, and we enable participation of communities in decision-making processes. And I think we need to think through how we can shape that and talk about that specifically. And of course, transparency, we are keeping that because we thought that was important to keep. If we have another language, another word you want to use instead of transparency for the Caribbean, we can. But I think it's something that we can embrace, but we added the word shared progress instead of accountability. Again, for us to debate if we want to put the word accountability instead of shared process, that's up to us. But we thought it would be important that we get our funders that are here in the Caribbean to commit publicly to sharing climate actions, sharing their progress and lessons learned, and that we go beyond traditional reporting and that we ensure that the evaluations that we are going to be engaged in are participatory, and there's community accountability, and that there's trust that we are fostering within our Caribbean region. And also, we're also interested in funding projects that focus on continuous improvement. And I think that's something that we need to speak truth to and talk about what does that mean when we talk about continuous improvement. So those are the 7 pillars there. And I'll just say, in terms of our discussion now, we wanted to stop here and ask specifically to the group, first, your thoughts on everything that you've heard, clarifying questions that you need answers to in terms of our process, in terms of in the recommendations, and to get your feedback. And so the big question, number 1, would be, are there any other recommendations that you'd want to add to this? And then number 2, the second question would be to talk more specifically about the pillars that we've shared and ways in which we can improve upon those pillars. And of course, the third question would be to focus on the draft itself, which we'll talk about a little bit about the process in terms of how we're going to be working in the committee to to draft a commitment for the region. So I was going to open it up for general questions, and then we can open there and just discussion. Anybody? I seen lots of any questions? Terry, Paige, Gail, Sasha, any questions?
Hi, Anthea. I had raised my hand, but I guess
Oh,
you.
hi.
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 No,
How
I
are
just
you?
want to say thanks. Thanks for inviting me to this really, really important discussion. And I'm really glad that the CLASP network is it's progressing, and we have these commitments, these draft commitments for philanthropic funders to ensure that we're able to I would say enable greater access to climate finance in the region. So I will have to leave at the top of the hour, unfortunately,
Mhm.
another meeting, but I did share some initial comments
Mhm.
in the chat about how to contextualize, the climate issue with what in the Caribbean with funding needs. So I don't know which pillar this might be. I think it might be recommendation 1,
Mhm.
where we need to include specific mention. So what I was looking at was what was provided in the email,
Mhm.
which would have been, I think, the Caribbean climate funding,
Mhm.
Caribbean climate funder commitment component.
Mhm.
So as well as the 8 recommendations, Annex 1.
Mhm.
It's like a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah. So in terms of Annex 1, the fact that it was generic in nature, it was to make sure that when we contextualize climate change, we have to make specific mention of loss and damage,
Mhm.
as this is important to Caribbean SIDS and in our context. And also that it's not only about contextualizing adaptation and mitigation to the Caribbean context, but about contextualizing how, the magnitude and frequency of climate impacts faced by Caribbean communities are actually interacting with existing vulnerabilities and underlying inequalities and development challenges experiencing by our countries.
Mhm.
So that you right now it's grounded in this is our reality, and we need financing that is fit for purpose and responsive to our needs.
Okay.
Yeah,
I got right. And thank you. Just say who you are so people know. So at least for the group, they know.
Sure, no problem. I'm Sasha Jatin Singh, and I've known Anthea and Talia for years, and I'm with Climate Analytics Caribbean right now. So we're a climate science and policy institute that's headquartered in Germany, but we have a regional office in the Caribbean here. And our focus is on SIDS and Caribbean SIDS related issues on climate change, if it's, adaptation, loss and damage, just transition, and climate finance, of course, and climate justice as well. So yeah, great
No.
work, and looking forward to more.
Yes. So I've captured your comments, and again, I hope to see you in our committee so we can sort of make sure that these points are included in our commitment. We've heard them loud and clear, and I think, I think you're right, and that they said it, but you've said it more explicitly around the idea of ensuring that loss and damage is something that it needs to be pronounced in our commitment because it's real, and how it intersects with all the other issues very intrinsically within the Caribbean. And what we would need from you, Sasha, would be some data on that we could include in the commitment, maybe 1 or 2 sentences, etc. And I'm going to speak with you offline about maybe one of the things we're going to be doing is a knowledge building session, and maybe we need to think through loss and damage as really a critical part of our conversation as we talk about climate resilience and what that looks, what loss and damage looks like. And I think you mentioned it over time, that it's not just the physical damage, but it's also the social impact realities within the Caribbean, the mental health issues that it intersects with as well, and how we measure that and how we talk about that. So we'll talk more and figure out how to make sure that, you know, these kinds of issues are part of the commitment. So thank you so much. And I also see Terry's hand up. Is there anything else, Sasha, that you want to share? And I see Terry, you want to share as well.
Oh, no, that's it. But looking forward to continued engagement.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. Terry?
Thanks. Hello, Anthea and everyone else. Thank you
Hi.
for the invitation. I did not, was not able to participate in the first session, so I'm coming into this one and really appreciate the recap of what was covered. I just want to append what Sasha just shared in terms of loss and mitigation and around adaptation and also in reinvestment, because when we are impacted by climate change, oftentimes it requires quite a bit of reinvestment in communities, in infrastructure, et cetera. And how we accommodate that needs to be thought through it from the inception, as opposed to, as you said in your opening comments, as opposed to being an add-on. And I'm going to segue also into, I liked the fact that the pillars while it doesn't say exclusively gender and intersectionality, it's referred to in your, and collaboration, it's referred to in your inclusive statement. But I'm a little disappointed that gender is not more pronounced, because gender is cross-cutting, as we know. And I don't know that we can, and like you said initially, there are 3 things that are foundational. And from my vantage point, gender should be one of them, because it is so foundational. So I'm not sure. I mean, the commitments, apparently, statements, the pillars, I'm sorry, have already been made, et cetera. But I would ask that you consider gender being more prominent, because we know that gender is tending to get lost now in conversations. There are some instances where gender cannot even be used in some areas. It's being stricken. Anybody who puts gender in a proposal, the proposal will go in the garbage. So we need to fight back against that, because that is a dangerous trajectory in our opinion. So I would just raise that flag and just ask us to reconsider how gender is infused in everything, along with intersectionality. And I mean, again, intersectionality, inclusivity, sometimes the 2 words are used interchangeably, and you might say, well, it's already covered there. So I can work with that, but definitely the gender component. I would suggest that you reconsider that, and also the reinvestment component.
I love that. Well, thank you, Terry.
Yes, thank you.
And I think, you know, you're right when we talk about intersectionality, say, well, it's about gender, it's about food insecurity, it's about all these things. But we know the reality in the Caribbean when it comes to climate and gender, that, you know, even the word woman, maybe we need to be more specific as well when we write our commitment, that we could say, i.e. women in particular, who are the most vulnerable and the ones that are the most impacted and affected in the Caribbean, that resources need to go to those groups, to the, to the women and indigenous groups, so we can actually spell it out. So I would invite you to help us to make sure that we add that in our commitment, and we get the right language to represent what's really happening on the ground. And again, data, of course, is important. And Terry, just say who you are so people know who you are here as well.
Sure. So I'm Terry Inns, the founding director and convener of the CEDAW Committee of Trinidad and Tobago. CEDAW is the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. It's a UN convention that Trinidad and Tobago and 192 other countries have signed on to and ratified.
Thank you so much. And so, yeah, so we will invite you as well to be part of the committee. As we draft, we have dates that are set, which we'll share at the end. And we'd love you to just join us. So to make sure that we accurately represent gender the way it needs to be represented for the region. And so I appreciate your participation as well. And thank you. And I love the reinvestment versus investment, actually, because I think that's very powerful for us. And maybe we could talk that through a little bit more, what that means. But I think we may invest, but we don't reinvest. And and I think reinvestments also speaks to the whole concept of sustainability as well. We invest once and then it's gone and then everything falls apart. So reinvestment is very strong, and I would like to have that conversation with the committee members if we use that term in our pillars as part for the region. And I would speak that would speak volumes. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Terry, for that. Anyone else? Because I know it's the top of the hour, but anybody else would like to speak and share on what you've heard around the recommendations, thoughts? I know some of you are new. I see a lot of new faces, a lot of new names in terms of this framework. If you want to ask what it is, please do so. Anybody else would like to share? I don't want to put up names. I don't want to do that. That won't be fair. So.
Good day, everyone. Georgia Scarlett Standards Foundation. I got in late because I just found out about the meeting, but I just wanted to find out if this was a voluntary move that you hope that funders in the Caribbean will align their projects toward this goal in end. I think they're very good, and I think many times lots of good is happening across the Caribbean, but maybe sometimes we're not as aligned as we should be. So I think this would be great. So I was just checking on that.
Thank you. Georgia, you're from where? I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Sandals Foundation.
Sandals?
Foundation.
Yeah. The Sandals Foundation. Wonderful. And of course, I'm going to recruit you to be part of the committee as well, because we need you. Because one of the things about Sandals Foundation, that you're one of the few regional foundations in the Caribbean, right? When we are doing our assessment around foundations, many of them are locally based, but Sandals, you're across the Caribbean and you're doing really different projects across the Caribbean. So you're seeing it in different spaces and how it translated. So it'll be great for you to also be part of the committee to sort of look at the entire commitment and to make sure that it represents many of the issues that you're also experiencing on the ground in the region. And just
No
thank you.
problem at all.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Georgia. Anyone else in the space here? I see other names as well. Okay, I see Edmond, I see Paige, Rashawn Robinson as well. Do you want to say anything here? Please feel free to share. Okay, so what we're going to go to next is the next slide. Right, so this is now the drafting of the of the recommendation. And so what we started to do is started to align many of the recommendations, and we'll add the ones that were mentioned here today with the paragraphs to make sure that the recommendations that were shared is represented in the different paragraphs that we will create for our commitment. Just note that many of the commitments, some are 1 page long, even though it's a United Kingdom. I think they just have a 1 page commitment. Some have a page and a half. We can decide the length of it, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the commitment represents the Caribbean region and what we consider our important priorities. But also we want to make sure that our funders feel comfortable signing this commitment and our intermediaries feel comfortable signing the commitment. And it's not a long, drawn out document that they are not able to read. So it has to be something that's readable, accessible, and also representative of the region. So the commitment, as we know it, will include how we have it now, but that's for us to share because you've made some changes already. That the knowledge and education and empowerment commitment aligns with recommendation 1, 2B, and 3. Doesn't mean anything here. And we have the paragraphs, and I'm not going to read them out because I think that would be too much here. But what I'm going to invite the group to do is to join the committee so we can sort of spell it out together what each recommendation states, what the pillar states, and to make sure that the language matches what the pillar represents. And of course, that data is also very much represented. Not too much data, but enough to make the case that we need to make for our funders to sign on the dotted line. So again, it's knowledge, education, and empowerment, where we're committing advancing, climate literacy and awareness, bold and equitable resources, integration and collaboration, endowments, assets, and investment, operations, best practices, advocacy, transparency. And of course, one of the things I want to say here as well is that this particular commitment is not going to be a static document. What we would like to do is that this will be a living and evolving framework for us, one that we can continue to refine with inclusive dialogue, that we can decide together how many times we meet to ensure that this document remains true to what's happening on the ground, and that is grounded in evidence-based practices, and it's collaborative. And at all times, even in the context of philanthropy, as you know, Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance focuses not only on participatory philanthropy, so to speak, but we are very much married to the concept of trust-based philanthropy and making sure that our foundations and our corporate social responsibility partners are directly connected to the front lines. And in this particular case, directly connected to those that are on the front lines of the climate crisis. And that, that are the investment that we are talking about is something that addresses the issue not only of our current vulnerability and survival, but also deals with the dignity that we deserve, and also that it allows us to guarantee a sustainable future. And so we really look forward to you all joining with us to help to develop this draft specifically. So any questions here in terms of the process, and any recommendations that you'd want to make before I move on to the next slide? Any recommendations? Okay, so in terms of time frame, we have 3 phases. So we are collecting the data. Please fill out the surveys as we speak. We'll be sharing with you the surveys. Those that are on our Zoom today, we'll send you the survey specifically so you can fill it out. We have a committee meeting on July 22nd and on July 30th. And so we'll be inviting all of you to join us at that committee meeting. It's not going to be a big committee meeting, but we definitely want to make sure that is representative of who's here and those that you think should be there, that we have a good group so that we can actually begin to agree on the pillars that were shared and make sure that the recommendations that were mentioned today are included. So there's July 22nd and July 30th. There's a knowledge building session that we're putting together in August. I know it's a time when people go away, but we want to do a knowledge building session with all of you. If there's a particular topic that you think that we need to speak on that would help us with this commitment, please share through an email. You can share it here in the chat in terms of what that knowledge building session should look like and what it should entail. And perhaps we should talk about the loss and damage issue, maybe, or maybe it should be focusing on gender. Terry, that could be a possibility, but it's a knowledge building session is really to help us provide grounding as we refine our commitment. And then our hope is in September, we'll bring everybody together. So all of you that are here, those who are at our July 10th meeting, and others to see our draft that we have that we feel good about. We have a forum in October in Jamaica that Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance is hosting in Jamaica. It's our first philanthropy in-person forum since we started. We began in 2018, formally were introduced to the UN in 2019, where we had an in-person philanthropy forum convening, and this one is our first. As you all know, we've done a lot of philanthropy action weeks every October, but this year we wanted to make sure that we begin to bring together our philanthropy partners and stakeholders within the region and globally to come together to talk strategically about, what is philanthropy, but also what does philanthropy need to grow and to sustain and to ensure that the resources are provided in the places where it needs to be provided to ensure the upliftment of the Caribbean and to ensure that the futures of the Caribbean are sustainable. And so our meeting is going to happen on October 28th and the 31st. And we look forward to, if any of you are interested and are very much part of the funding community, and of course, those that are very interconnected to the funding community is also invited, and then we can share the information with you if you have interest in participating in that forum. So it's going to be in Jamaica from the 28th to the 31st, and it's going to be in Kingston, primarily in Kingston. And there is where we're going to have many foundations in Jamaica and regional, as well as some global funders who are in the region providing funding. And so we want to do a special signing of the draft at that meeting in October. So our intention is that by October 28th, we will have a final draft to present. And we will share with the group our process that we're using and talk about our engagement and talk about our vision for the Caribbean. And so thank you so much for being part of this convening. And I'm going to turn it over to Talia to close. Talia, please close. Hi, Talia. Thank you. Well, thank you for
Yeah,
joining
sorry.
today. Go ahead, Talia.
Sorry about that, guys. I was controlling
problem.
the Zoom. Yeah, I just want to reiterate some of the key points made as well too. Terry, I think we're going to have a hard look at that pillar and probably maybe use the word intersectionality over the word collaboration. Because I do agree. It's in the explanation as you saw. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming today and sharing your opinions and just the value you all are adding to the process. We all know how this stakeholder engagement and participatory process is in terms of your time and effort. So we truly appreciate it, and we look forward to some of you guys here mentioned today joining our very small committee to get the process going and finalized and have us ready for our very big first signing that we want to really make sure we get achieved by October. I want to also invite everyone again to I know a lot of information in terms of many links was in that email that we shared with the invitation that went out, and to look into joining Carifil as a member, as our membership is fully up and running, our membership process and platform. And yeah, we look forward to another meeting and staying in touch via whatever mechanism you choose to stay in touch with us, email, call, WhatsApp, and um, everyone do have a lovely rest of the week, a productive rest of week, and talk soon.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining. And please take note of the meeting dates. We'll send them to you directly after
Yes.
this meeting. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.